That is not a conservative position, my friends. My politics have not changed, but I am reacting to politics that have. And this is yet another example of how the woke invert the very thing that used to make liberals liberals. Olympic surfing exposes whitewashed native Hawaiian roots. Yeah, the Olympics added surfing this year. Good. Surfers deserve to be recognized as athletes. I'm sorry. What I meant to say is, no, that's cultural appropriation. The AP says that for Hawaiians, probably all two of them, including surfing in the Olympics is an extension of the racial indignity seared into the history of the game and their homeland when white outsiders took over their spiritual art form. Or just people having fun in the ocean.
It's not only Hollywood that critics say has been shaped by woke politics. Many argue that professional sports have increasingly become part of the same cultural debate. In recent years, several athletes and commentators have found themselves at the center of controversy after declining to participate in symbolic gestures tied to broader social movements. Bill Maher, however, chose not to go along quietly. He addressed the issue directly, offering sharp commentary that quickly drew attention. As always, if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button and let's jump right into it.
Director of the opening ceremony was fired hours before the event because they found out there was a Holocaust joke in a comedy routine he did decades ago. Well, you know, context is everything. Obviously, it didn't strike people as beyond the pale at the time. Young people have to stop flattering themselves that they're Nostradamus and would have foreseen, had they been around then, everything that's unacceptable now. And for further context, Mel Brooks wrote one of the most successful musicals of all time around the song Springtime for Hitler.
Critics argue that certain activist spaces online rarely let things go. In their view, there's a constant watchfulness, a sense that public figures remain under ongoing scrutiny, with past statements preserved and ready to be revisited at any time. Years of tweets, archived interviews, old posts, even private messages can resurface. The age of the material often doesn't matter, and context can quickly become secondary. A single line, a joke, or an offhand remark may be pulled forward, reframed, and interpreted in a far harsher light than when it was first made. Once that cycle begins, reaction spreads rapidly. Attention shifts away from a person's broader career and narrows to one isolated moment. That's what unfolded in the case of this Olympic Games director. Previous remarks were revisited, circulated widely, and ultimately broadcast to a global audience within a very short time.
Wow, the people who just want to always win. Days before that firing, the opening ceremony's musical director was also forced out because someone dug up an interview with him from 1994 where he admitted to bullying classmates as a child. As a child. Remember when your teacher used to try and scare you by saying, "This is going to go on your permanent record"? Yeah, no longer an empty threat now.
Some critics argue that once online backlash gains momentum, it rarely slows down on its own. In their view, public pressure can continue building until a person's reputation is severely damaged, with criticism repeated and amplified across platforms. They suggest that little is considered off-limits. Past mistakes may be revisited, early comments re-examined, and even remarks made in youth brought forward to support a present-day narrative. The surrounding context, personal growth, or the passage of time can receive less attention than the immediate storyline taking shape. There is also a perceived double standard, according to these observers. They argue that those driving the criticism often present themselves as if they have no similar history of missteps or immature moments. While demanding near perfection from others, they may overlook the reality that everyone's past contains flaws and learning experiences.
Creative director of the entire shebang of the whole Olympics got shit-canned because he once made a fat joke in a private conversation. This is called a purge. It's a mentality that belongs in Stalin's Russia. How bad does this atmosphere we are living in have to get before the people who say cancel culture is overblown admit that is in fact an insanity that is swallowing up the world? What a ridiculous crowd. I'm back, not the audience. I'm back. There's Phil. And that is not a conservative position, my friends. My politics have not changed, but I am reacting to politics that have. And this is yet another example of how the woke invert the very thing that used to make liberals liberals. Snitches and that's not being liberal.
Maher doesn't soften his criticism when discussing what he describes as woke activism. He portrays certain online groups as constantly watching in the background, looking for past statements that can be resurfaced to publicly criticize or discredit someone. In his view, the focus has shifted away from accountability in a constructive sense. He argues that the dynamic is increasingly about leverage and timing, identifying a mistake, preserving it, and releasing it when it will generate the strongest reaction. Maher maintains that this approach, even when emerging from liberal spaces, does not align with what he considers traditional liberal principles. As he defines it, classic liberalism emphasized tolerance, open dialogue, and the belief that individuals should have room to learn and change over time. By contrast, he suggests that today's environment can discourage discussion and reward conformity, creating something he sees as more rigid than the ideals it claims to represent.
Press is a real news organization, yeah? So why am I reading this headline? Olympic surfing exposes whitewashed native Hawaiian roots. Yeah, the Olympics added surfing this year. Good. Surfers deserve to be recognized as athletes. I'm sorry. What I meant to say is, no, that's cultural appropriation. The AP says that for Hawaiians, probably all two of them, including surfing in the Olympics is an extension of the racial indignity seared into the history of the game and their homeland when white outsiders took over their spiritual art form. Or just people having fun in the ocean.
Some critics argue that certain activist spaces have become highly skilled at reinterpreting ordinary situations through a political lens. In their view, simple moments, people laughing, relaxing, or enjoying time at the beach, can quickly be reframed as carrying broader cultural or ideological meaning. What might once have been seen as harmless fun is sometimes analyzed as symbolic or socially significant. These interpretations are often expressed in polished, academic-sounding language that gives the impression of depth and authority. The phrasing can appear thoughtful and persuasive at first glance. However, detractors contend that once the terminology and dramatic framing are set aside, the core argument may feel less substantial. They describe it as prioritizing presentation over practical impact and narrative over clarity. In this perspective, everyday events are elevated into controversies that demand public attention, only for the larger meaning to appear far less significant than initially suggested.
For all the violations of the woke penal code, cultural appropriation just might be the dumbest of all. First of all, there are 25,000 islands in the Pacific. How do we know a Hawaiian was the first to stand on a board in the water? It seems like something anyone in any ocean would eventually get around to. And if you're a surfer, it doesn't matter if you're black, white, or in between. You all taste the same to sharks.
Maher argues that debates around cultural appropriation can sometimes become inconsistent in their reasoning. He questions why acts of cultural appreciation are, in certain cases, framed as inherently harmful, particularly in a world that is more interconnected than ever before. Today, cultures influence one another constantly through music, fashion, food, and art. That exchange has long been part of how societies evolve and grow. People often adopt elements they admire, not to diminish their origins, but to engage with and celebrate them. Maher suggests that this blending can reflect curiosity, admiration, and an openness to experiences beyond one's own background. However, he contends that some activists interpret these exchanges primarily as transgressions rather than opportunities for understanding. In his view, restricting cultural interaction does not preserve tradition. Instead, it risks isolating it. He argues that culture remains dynamic and vibrant precisely because of shared influence and human connection across communities.
Say a Hawaiian did invent surfing. Should he or she have kept it to themselves? Most of human history is a horror story, but the good parts are about different groups coming together and sharing. It's sort of the whole point of the Olympics, which itself comes from Greece, where wrestling was invented as a way for completely heterosexual men to get to know each other. Badminton has roots in India. Tennis comes from France. Skiing from Scandinavia and Taekwondo from Korea. Judo was appropriated from from the Far East and skateboarding from the far out.
Maher argues that when a particular community develops an idea or tradition, it does not mean that contribution must remain permanently restricted to that group. Throughout history, progress has often depended on the movement of knowledge, customs, inventions, and creative expression beyond their original setting. In the modern era, global connectivity has accelerated that process. Advances in technology, travel, and communication have reduced many of the barriers that once kept societies separate. As a result, people encounter different cultures more frequently and in real time, drawing inspiration and adapting what resonates with them in new contexts. Maher suggests that this type of exchange does not weaken culture but can help it grow. By reaching broader audiences, traditions may evolve and remain meaningful in changing environments. He contends that shared influence can create common ground, encouraging mutual respect and a broader sense of shared human experience.
There's this new rule that the first thing to do, that the first to do something, are the only ones who get to have it. Jewish people spent most of their history wandering, but when they see other people milling around, they don't say, "Can you not? That's sort of our thing." You know, change is not synonymous with progress. Newer doesn't automatically mean better. This new idea that each culture must remain in its own separate silo is not better. It's not progress.
Maher argues that discouraging people from exploring or learning about other cultures runs counter to the way societies have historically developed. Human civilization, he notes, has long advanced through observation, adaptation, and the sharing of ideas across communities. Many of the innovations and traditions celebrated today emerged because individuals encountered new influences, borrowed concepts, and expanded on them. To suggest that cultural exchange should now be restricted, he contends overlooks centuries of interaction and mutual influence. In his view, certain activist frameworks can falter under closer examination when they place rigid guidelines above practical reasoning and natural human curiosity. Maher maintains that such an approach may foster hesitation rather than openness. He suggests it can create anxiety about saying or doing the wrong thing instead of encouraging respectful engagement. Rather than bringing people together, he believes excessive caution risks dividing them. Ultimately, he argues that open exchange supports learning, connection, and the flexibility that enables societies to grow over time.
In fact, it's messing with one of the few ideas that still really does make this melting pot called America great. Not everything is about oppression. Stealing natural resources from indigenous peoples, yes, of course, that is exploitation. But I swear not one Beach Boys song resulted in any Hawaiian having less waves to surf. Not one African record buyer stopped purchasing local music after Paul Simon made Graceland. But lots of white buyers in America were turned on to and then bought African music. And today, Korean boy bands make Western-style music. You don't get to #1 singing this.
Maher raises a question about perceived inconsistencies in cultural debates. For example, Korean artists who perform Western pop, rap, or R&B are frequently praised for their creativity and global reach. Their engagement with genres that originated in the West is typically viewed as artistic expression rather than controversy. However, he argues that when Western artists draw inspiration from other cultures, the response can be markedly different. In those cases, what might be framed as admiration or creative exchange is sometimes labeled cultural appropriation. Maher points to this contrast as evidence of what he sees as a double standard. In his view, cultural exchange appears widely accepted in one direction, but more heavily scrutinized in another. He suggests that this uneven reaction can create confusion about what is considered respectful engagement. If culture is meant to foster connection, he contends, applying different standards based on who is borrowing from whom risks deepening division rather than encouraging mutual understanding.
That's the great thing about cultural mixing. It makes things better for everyone. BTS can be a hit in America, and I can get kimchi on a taco. Isn't that better than everyone walling itself off from outsiders? I thought walls were supposed to be bad. But we're living now in a world where straight actors are told they can't play gay roles, and white novelists aren't allowed to imagine what it would be like to be a Mexican immigrant, even though trying to inhabit the life of someone else is almost the very definition of empathy, the bedrock of liberalism. And by the way, if anyone deserves to bitch about stealing in the Olympics, it's the horses in the equestrian events who have to watch humans get medals for everything they...
In closing, Maher argues that what he sees as the core tension within modern woke activism lies in its internal contradictions. A movement that presents itself as focused on fairness and inclusion, he suggests, can at times resemble a culture centered on monitoring, criticism, and selective outrage. Rather than fostering open dialogue, he believes certain approaches discourage curiosity. Instead of embracing cultural exchange, they may subject it to heightened scrutiny, and instead of reducing division, he argues, they can unintentionally reinforce it. Maher maintains that meaningful progress has historically emerged from openness, exploration, and the freedom to engage with new ideas. Cultures, in his view, thrive when shared, not when restricted. He also emphasizes that personal growth comes through mistakes and reflection, not through an expectation of perfection. Societies, he contends, become stronger when they allow debate, disagreement, and a range of perspectives. Ultimately, Maher concludes that practical reasoning should outweigh rigid ideology, because lasting unity is built through connection rather than coercion or silence. If you enjoyed today's discussion, be sure to like and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.